What's up? How y'all doing? It's Jared. Y'all know Chris Reeves made a kitchen knife? I didn't. Tell I was looking for a kitchen knife because the one I got a custom made 154 cm kitchen knife. I'll show it to you in a minute, but it's just too damn fat. I was in the market for a new knife. I got it on Blade HQ and I saw this thing sitting in there. I was like, are you kidding me? Chris Reeves makes a kitchen knife? Like, yeah, I really got excited about this thing. I was like, oh, I need that. And then I saw the specs on it, actually saw how it was made, and kind of talked myself out of it. You know, it's chisel ground. It's a hollow chisel grind, which is just kind of an interesting thing. And it's not kind of the style of knife that I was looking for. It's got a plastic handle on it, as far as I was concerned at the time. We'll get into that in a second. And so I just, I turned myself off of it for a little while. And then I shopped around. I was looking around for a while, thinking about different knives. I almost wound up buying a few different little chef's knives. And I just couldn't get this thing out of my brain. I just couldn't do it. I was like, oh, I want this freaking Sikayo. It's a Chris Reeves kitchen knife. Like, I love Chris Reeve knives, the two that I've got. And so, I just bought it. You know what I mean? I was like, okay, I'm going to buy this knife. And am I glad I did? Yes and no. Is it good? Yes and no. It excels at some things, while at others it's just not very good. Again, I'll get into that in a minute. But these handles are actually something called, Ultem 1000, right? It's a special, space age plastic. It's extremely heat resistant, flame retardant, very chemical resistant, durable, just super space age type plastic material, and it actually looks pretty good. I've grown to like it quite a bit, and you can see there that it's transparent. The whole handle of this knife is hollowed out, skeletonized, right? The whole thing, especially because it's got this giant lanyard loop. For some reason, on the back of a kitchen knife, you'd hook it on something. Did people hook knives and hang them up in the kitchen like that? I don't know if that's actually a thing. If it is, that's probably pretty useful, but it leads to being basically no weight at the end of this handle. This thing is just extraordinarily blade heavy. And it is S35VN like all, most Chris Reeve knives. I think all of them at this point are S35VN. So it is following along that line there. And it's just a huge chunk of it. But it's all weight forward. There's so much weight up front, which does actually lead to a decent chop. But the handle here is it is designed, seems to me, for a push cut. This thing is just designed to actually chop like this. The rock cut. That's really what it wants to do, because you've got this shelf here. The fact that it's just completely rounded, it's crowned the entire way around, which just is really nice. I actually really like that fact. But so you can get a lot of pressure. You can put a lot of force up in this little area right here, especially since you don't have to worry if you slip off because it's rounded. He's actually taken off that little section of blade there, and so you don't actually, it's just a little bit of safety, and so you can actually really dig into that, especially with this little lump here meeting up with my ring finger. And so it just rocks really, really well in my hand. I like that fact. I like how it feels in my hand. As far as a kitchen knife goes, I would never want something tactical or EDC with a handle shape like this, especially just how ununiform it is. You can see that it's just a lot wider on one side than the other. The actual handle shape here completely changes. If I can get my hand out of the way so you can actually see that there. And so it definitely is right and left-handed. It says that on the website, and they're not lying. It really is. The hollow grind on here isn't quite as deep as like on the Sebenza. I actually need to clean this thing up a little bit, but you can see here the hollow that's on the Sebenza comes down, and it brings it to basically shallow. It's almost flat right there, right behind the actual cutting edge. It's flat. And so that's what the grind of the Sebenza kind of gets its ooh and its ah. And I thought maybe that was going to be the case with this knife. And it is to a point, because it does come down very thin all up to about this point, but it's not ground quite like a Sebenza. That is not the factory edge. I did actually reprofile this thing. I put it to about 30 degrees on one side, so it's got a 15 degree edge up, per side if you were going to do it that way, because it is a chisel grind. And that's nice because it does lead to being very thin, to being able to take a very thin edge a lot easier. You can put that, I can put a 15 degree edge on it, 30 degree edge on it, much easier than I could something, with this V grind. It's just, it's not necessarily easy, it's just a lot less work, but the edge isn't ground the same way. You know, it's definitely not that hollow grind and the same hollow grind as the Sebenza. And it's not really comparable in either to the Nkosi here. So Chris Reeves Nkosi, I got some scratches on the blade. Check that out. It's looking good, looking good, looking good. I like the way that looks, but it's really not quite like this either. It does have its own kind of shape to it, and I really like the way that it's done for what I like it to do. And once I get into the kitchen, I'll actually get further into that, but the ergonomics are done well. You can see that the handle is screwed on here, which doesn't, it kind of messes with you because you can think, oh yeah, I can take that off and clean underneath it if I really need to, but they've glued this thing on there, and whatever type of glue that they use just holds. I mean, it sucks on there. I tried to get it off, and I did actually take out a little screwdriver and pry on it a little bit. I could probably get them off if I wrenched on it, but I mean, I don't want to mar up this finish, and it was just more torsion, you know, more work than I was actually willing to put into it to do that. You can see the handles are actually inset. It kind of gives an effect like it's rounded, like it has these dome shapes on it, but they're actually concave. And so it doesn't have domes, it's got little spikes all the way around the actual handle, and so it does have a lot of stability as far as turning in your hand, which is important because if you're familiar with the chisel grind, it does veer off in material, and this knife is definitely no exception with that. But I like the way that the actual spine here just has this little bump in it. You can see that it's just bent. The knife looks bent, and that's interesting, but the finish isn't done up on this little swedge. You can see there's a little swedge actually taken out at the tip of the blade here. See that? And it's just grinded. I mean, that's just a grinder setting actually on that little chisel, or on that little swedge, little swedge coming out of the top of the, actually on the top of this blade. Leads to almost like a dagger profile tip. Look at that tip. This thing is just penetrate into material like nothing, right? Convex edge on there. And I did that on a whetstone, so it's a little bit convex actually on that, the edge there, but just looks good, don't it? Just a mean tip on a kitchen knife. It almost seems unnecessary, but this thing is definitely sick. There's two sizes you can get. I paid $250 for this thing. You can get a 6-inch or a 9-inch. This is the 9-inch. If you know me, you watch my channel, you know I had to buy the 9-inch version just because it's bigger. But the 6-inch version comes in at, 6-inch version I believe is $225. This thing's $250. S35 VN, just a dope knife. I'm going to take it into the kitchen now, cut some stuff up. Hey, it's cooking with Liquormonger. Nice. Alright. It works really well to actually for thin material, okay? If I want to get a really thin slice, right? I just want to get a little bit of a paper thin slice. If I can actually do this, you can see it'll work, right? Because it can push the material out of the way. You can see that how that carrot's folding away. It's because it needs to be able to move, right? Because if I come in here and give it thicker, right, so that material, so the material on the edge can't actually be forced away, it wants to curve over. You can see how it snapped the carrot there. This thing is definitely sharp enough to be able to sail through this carrot, no problem. And there's no pressure going through it. That's just basically sharp as a knife. You can see that it veers off, right? It'll do that every single time. You can see the edge of that, or the way that carrot is actually bent in, and it does that with everything, especially when I come in, if I want to slice it to the side like this. You can see that? I can't get a straight cut. And so it does some things better than it does other things. It doesn't have a problem with just cleaning material, you know what I mean? If you want to cut the edge off some green beans, cut them up, stuff like that works really well. Take them off. I mean, it's a knife edge. As long as it's not thick enough to the point where you have to come up onto the actual bevel, it slices really well. And it's interesting how it works with cheese. This is some Havarti cheese, right? Relatively soft. You can see it kind of bending there. And again, this stuff can move. It can actually bend over. And so as long as I'm doing my part in keeping the actual blade straight, because it does want to veer, it does want to curve in my hand. And so I've got to use a lot of actual force to keep it steady, but as long as I keep it steady, I can get a decently straight cut. Something, some relatively soft cheese It's orange now. You see that? Because it's got carrot juice on it. It's an interesting thing. This is some really hard Parmesan here, right? A little bit harder, a lot harder cheese. This is like, I think it's 12 or 18-month-old Parmesan. And when I actually cut into this and I try to keep it straight, you can see how much that blade is veering off there. And that was with me trying to keep it straight. Look at that cut. Just doesn't work. But if I want a very thin slice, I want to just shave off a little bit of cheese, you can see it folding away from the edge there. It works great. And I can actually get a lot thinner slices with this particular style of blade. The fact that it's chisel brown works excellent when you're doing something like an onion, right? Because you can actually use the flat of the spine. What I do is keep the flat of the spine pushed up against the onion like that. Actually made it up against the onion as I'm cutting. So once I start the cut, I'm not forcing it, but I'm just leaning the blade actually into the onion. And so I can get some really nice, really thin, consistent slices. As long as the material is able to move, I think it works really well. And as long as it's not thick, you take it into something like meat here. This is a pork chop. Try to debone this thing. And the edge, or the tip of this knife being so sharp means it really does do a good job at maneuvering. I can get around all these little bends and all the little edges of that actual bone there. You can see that? And actually clean. I can actually clean out that piece of meat relatively easy. Get that bone out of there because it is so thin. So it does still maneuver through stuff like this really well. But if you're trying to cut into a roast, you're trying to, do something more thick, just more intricate, it's not going to work very well. Look at how thin I can get some of these slices of pork chop. I don't actually know what I would ever use that for, but it's definitely impressive. And so it works for some things. For others, I really just don't think it's the best. I gotta watch out. I'm contaminating my cheese with pork. This is my previous kitchen knife. This is a hard edge custom. You can see the problem with this thing is it's just so thick, and it's got a convex edge on it, but it starts to grind right before the actual edge. So it's flat. The whole edge is flat, and then it's just convex right there at the end, which is good for some things. It's good for edge stability, but it just doesn't cut through material nearly as well. You can see that. And this thing has got just as sharp of an edge as the Sikayo here, but because it's so fat, I have to actually force it through material. That's a nice cut right there. But it just doesn't do nearly as good of a job at slicing thin. This is a thin slicer, but it's not an overall good kitchen knife. I really don't think. I can't recommend this for a single knife. Because I am now in the kitchen for another knife. I want something with a thinner edge. Something with a V grind with a thinner edge. Because this works for certain, a lot of stuff, but I don't want to gravitate towards it every time. That's it. I just bought a SOCOM Elite. Y'all have a good one.